Are you getting ready for AWS certification exams? Here is one of the key exam topic: EC2 Root volumes, Instant Store versus EBS. This video is not developed from a pre-designed audio script. Instead, I extracted this session from my live online exam preparation class. Let's get started.
So now let's do the instance life cycle. You take the AMI, then you launch. Once it's launched, then it's not going to be immediately available. It goes to pending, then it's going to the running, then it goes to shutdown, or it can go to stopped, that it can go to terminated. Like, when you launch an instance, initially it is going to be pending, then it's going to change as running. When you stop an instance, it's not going to be immediately get stopped. It goes to stopping and it goes to stopped. The reason why this is important, not from the exam standpoint, but you can do certain action when the instance going through the different transition in the real world. So for an example, like if you want to take a backup of certain things, or if you want to install certain things, those are the things are possible when the instance is getting transitioned from one state to another state. Also, you have to remember one important thing. Once you say stop, then normally the instance is not going to use the same host. I'm talking about the hardware underneath. So whenever you stop and restart the instance is going to be moved from previous host to the new host. I don't know whether it is exactly every time it's going to happen, or if the previous overloaded, then it's going to move to the new host. But in general, when you start and restart the instance will be moved to a new host. New host is talking about the hardware under the hypervisor. But if you do the reboot though, it's going to stay on the same host because it is not going to stop. So there is no need to move that to a different host. So when you do the reboot, it's going to stay on the same host. So the difference is sometime if you have a data, right, on your instance, when you do restart, that means it's going to stop, then it's going to restart the server, then it is going to move from that particular host to a different host, and you are going to lose your data, whatever you store in that instance. You found some problem, your web server is not running, so you thought I want to reboot my machine. If I do the reboot, then the data will be there, so you don't need to worry about the data. So whenever you do stop and restart, it will basically move your instance from that host to a new host. You are going to lose the underlying data.
Wait, I don't quite get that. Can you repeat that again, please, Rod?
Example, if you are using an instance, now you decided that you are not going to use the instance for the next few hours. So what normally people will do, they stop the instance, then after 5 hours, you can restart the instance. When you stop and restart, the instance is not going to stay on the same host. For an example, a hardware server where you have one or more instances are running. So if you are stopping and restarting an instance, what AWS is going to do, it is going to move the instance to the available host, which might be a new host. So when you move the instance from one host to another host, previously if you stored some data on your root volume, you are going to lose the data. That is the first thing. Reboot is not equal to stop and start, which is not a restart. When you do the reboot, what is going to happen? It is that particular instance, when you do the reboot, immediately you shut down, within a second it's going to start again. If that happens, that particular instance is going to stay on the same host. That means the data also will be there. So you're not going to lose the data. Okay. So another important factor here, somebody is mentioning in the message, if it is this scenario, losing the data scenario is only for, right? But if you are using a EBS volume, then you don't lose the data. Okay. If you are using other type of volume, which we are going to see in the next slide, then you lose the data. Any doubts? for time being, if you guys don't understand about the data part, ignore that statement. Right now, what you have to understand, if you stop and restart an instance, the instance will be moved to a different host. If you are rebooting the instance, it's going to stay on the same host.
Raj, so if the instance is started on a different host, will Amazon take care of all the, the networking and all of the other stuff automatically without we having to manually do that?
No, normally we don't do anything right now.
Right.
That is what the whole purpose of EC2. So you configure, you say yes, then the configuration, everything will be under Amazon umbrella. So when you stop and restart, it's going to move to the different host with the same configuration what you had already, because they recorded the configuration already.
Okay, but the IP address will change in that case?
IP address will change. Even the public IP address change. That is the reason if you don't want the public IP address to be used, then you can use the elastic IP whenever you want. Like now, you can constantly use the same IP address. That is the main purpose of elastic IP.
Oh, okay. Thanks.
Hey, Raj, this is Al. Why is it important, or why do we have to know or even care if it moves to a new host? Why is that?
Next slide will answer that.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. So in any, computing world, there is a concept called root volume. So what is a root volume? Root volume is where your operating system is going to be stored. So when you boot your machine, the first thing what's going to happen is the machine is going to use the root volume to load the operating system. So everything, like even for our laptop, we have a root volume or the boot volume. So for an example, if you are booting it, you can boot it from your CD, you can boot it from your C drive, you can boot it from some other, medium. Whatever the medium you are trying to use to boot your system, basically when you are booting your system, you are loading your operating system on your system. So that is what we call as root volume. So whether it is a Windows operating system or Linux or Unix, you normally have a root volume. That is where the system is going to initially read the operating system and load the operating system. Not only that, it is going to load all the necessary drivers as well as software which is needed for your system to be up and running. In AWS world, there are two different root volumes available. It is a very important exam topic. You expect at least 1 or 2 questions from this, from the next 3 slides. So there are 2 different type of root volume available in AWS world. One is called EBS, which is a elastic block store. Another one is called instance store. So now we are going to talk about the instance store. So how do we decide whether we are going to use instance store or EBS volume as our root volume? It is basically decided by your AMI. So when you create a new AMI, or when you are using the existing AMI to launch your instance, the AMI is going to say whether this AMI supports EBS or instance store. So now let me go to my console. Here, let me go to one of my AMI, which I just now created. So now, if you see the root device, it shows here EBS, because when I created this particular AMI, I said this AMI is going to use EBS as a root device. Okay, but I can also say that I want to use instance store as my root. So whenever you create an AMI, you have 2 options. You can say EBS as your root device or instance store as your root device. Sometime when you create an AMI, it won't even give you the option of instance store. It only gives you the option of EBS volume. The reason is certain images they don't support instant store. They only support EBS. So that's the reason you don't even get the option of instant store. Instant store is only supported by some of the images. That means like some of the AMIs. So if you are creating a AMI based on those images, then you get both the option. Otherwise, you get only one option. But you cannot control that. For example, when you are creating your EC2 instance, you cannot say like, I want to use EBS or instant store, because you get that based on the AMI which you are using to launch the instance. If you are not sure, you can go to the description of the AMI, which will show what is the root device it supports. That is what we went and checked. If I create EC2 instance from this particular AMI, the root device is going to be EBS. Okay? So that is how this AMI is going to be used. So if you go to any AMIs, in case like, if you are launching an instance, now if you select any of the AMI, or if you see any of the AMI, you can see there is a root device type, EBS. Okay. So if you see something called instant store, looks like most of them are EBS based, because all the latest AMIs are EBS based. They don't use instant store, because after we finish this like 3 slides, you guys understand why instant store is not great, specifically for the work what means. So here, data in an instant store exists as long as the associated instance exists. Let's say like you are using a EC2 instance backed by instant store as your root volume. Again, we are talking about the root volume. We are not talking about every storage in that particular server. If you are using that instant store as your root volumes, you destroy your EC2 server for some reason. Either you terminate your EC2 or you stop your EC2. Once the EC2 goes down, whatever you have in the instant store, you are going to lose them. The data you have in your instant store, you are going to lose them. So data is lost when instance is stopped or terminated. That means like if you are using an instant store as your root volume, you have to make sure your EC2 instance is always running. The only time you can do is the reboot. When you do the reboot, you still preserve the data. Otherwise, you are going to lose the data. Data will continue to exist when instance is rebooted. So if you want to, that is only way you can take a backup whenever you want to by using the snapshots of the instance store and store them in the S3. That is the only way you can do. But when you terminate the instance accidentally, that means you are going to lose the data what you have in your root volume. This is like important from the exam standpoint, because you can see a question from either they will ask you about the difference between EBS and the instant store, or they will say like the state of the data when you are using instant store as the root volume. If you stop, what is going to happen? If you terminate, what is going to happen? Otherwise, like if you are looking at a use, you are designing a system which will collect some kind of a credit card information. That particular information is going to be stored on your root volume. Whenever there is a problem, you have to recover the data and move the data to a different EC2 instance. In this scenario, do you use instant store as your root volume or EBS as your root volume? The answer obviously EBS. Because if you use instant store, if your machine gets some reason like terminated or failed, then there is no way you can retrieve the data back. So that is the reason you have to use EBS instead of instant store. Any doubts? The other option is the EBS as root volume. Now we know how the instant store works. Now we can easily understand why we want to. So when we use the EBS volume copied from EBS snapshot and attached as a root volume. So when you load any AMI, if the AMI uses EBS as a root, like there is a snapshot will be stored somewhere. So what when you launch a EC2 instance, it's going to basically copy the snapshot and make it as your root volume. You don't see that, it is not visible, but that is a background process going to happen. If instance is stopped or rebooted, the data in the EBS volume still remains, because EBS volume is not going to stay on the host computer itself. EBS is like, kind of a plug-in or your like thumb drive kind of a type. So it is not going to be attached to that particular server. So even if you stop or rebooted, that particular volume will be available for you. So the root volume will be deleted on termination. But there is a important another question will come from this particular section. So even though if it is a EBS volume, let me launch an instance, then we will see how this works. Let me go back here. EC2. Launch an instance. I'm going to select Amazon Linux AMI. I'm going to use the general purpose. Now you can see the instance storage. Basically, this is only available with EBS. You cannot use any other storage type for this particular instance type. So now I'm going to say configure. Network, subnet, everything is like default. I'm not touching any of them. Then next, add storage. So now when we add storage, now we are telling like, no, this is the root volume. It came because the template what we used. So the root volume is like, already we know that this is a EBS volume, okay, because it came from the AMI. It is not the instance store, like, kind of a EBS volume. So now here there is an option, delete on termination. So when you terminate the instance, it is going to delete this EBS volume too. So there is no big difference between the instance store and EBS. If you check this particular checkbox, that means what you are trying to say, I know this is the EBS root volume. You can keep the EBS root volume, but if the flag delete on termination is on, then when you terminate the EC2 instance, it's going to delete this EBS volume. If you don't want that to happen, if you think or if you need to protect your data, what is stored on your EBS volume, you uncheck this. So if you uncheck this, then even if you terminate your EC2 instance, still this particular EBS volume is going to be there, so that you can use it with different EC2 instance or whatever you want to do, because your data will be stored and it is not going to get deleted.
Raj, is the delete on termination, is it done on this screen or the previous screen?
In this screen, here.
Can you go back to the previous screen before this? Because I thought I saw. What about this enable termination protection? Down there.
That is different. Enable termination protection, if you put that, like for an example now, where is that option? This one, right? This one is terminating your instance itself, honestly. So now, if I do this, delete on termination is on for this.
One second, Raj, 1 second. Before you launch this one, here in this page, there are 2 columns called volume types. One is the first one column, volume type, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Fifth one is also called as volume type.
Yeah.
So what is this? Like, what is the difference between these 2 volume types?
This is the root volume. So for this allocation, we are using a root volume. So root volume is, as I mentioned before, it will contains your operating system. So when you launch your EC2 instance, this is from where you are going to load the operating system. That is a root volume. Okay? So the root volume is like, when you buy a laptop, you get the C drive, right? Yeah. Because the C drive is going to have your Windows operating system. Okay? So every EC2 instance is going to have only one root volume, because you cannot have multiple root volume. Okay, because that is your C drive. On top of it, you can add additional disk. That means like you can add a D drive, you can add a E drive, you can add a F. the root volume is going to only have the operating system, but if you want to add more capacity, you can add more volumes.
No, that I got it. Like you told we have two kind of volume types, which is root and then or else EBS. But we have another.
We have two different volume types for root. One is instant store, another one is EBS.
Yeah, sorry. And then if you see here in the root step, there are three volume types here. So which one you should consider?
This is a performance problem. So you want to use root as a EBS volume. In the EBS volume itself, there are three different categories. Okay. For an example, magnetic is not going to give a fast performance. It is going to be a little bit slow. If you are using a general purpose SSD, it is going to give better performance. If you want much better or the best performance, then use the provision IOPS. Okay. So still the volume is going to be EBS. In the EBS itself, there are three different categories.
So one question will come, how many volume types are there for one instance? So which one we should tell, two, or what should be the question for this? How we can distinguish which volume types they are asking for?
This is they always called as a root volume type.
Okay.
So they will be asking you what is the volume type you use for the root volume. When they talk about a word called root volume, there is only two options. Okay, one is called instant store, another one is EBS. You don't have any other option there. Okay, this one is type of EBS volume. It is only applicable for EBS. If you use the instant store, you don't have all these options.
Okay, and if you go to the volume type of EBS, it's not three. It's I think it's 5 different volume types are there.
Then the root volume, you don't have a throughput optimized. You don't have cold HDD. You don't have those two categories when you are using as a root. Maybe there is some limitations using EBS as a root, because that is the reason you may not find those two categories there.
And Raj, what I had read is that those two cannot, with those two you cannot boot the system.
Yeah.
That could be the reason.
Yeah, maybe that's why they're not putting it in the root.
If you are using a root volume, there are only two types, either EBS or instant store. Okay. For EBS, you have 5 different categories here. And especially these two categories added recently. When I was 6 months back, only we had 3 different categories. Now we got 5 different categories.
Yeah.
Okay. So now we are talking about delete on termination. Delete on termination is for volume only. This is only for EBS volume. So when you terminate the instance, the volume will get deleted if you have this particular option is on. Okay. So if you don't want that volume get deleted when you terminate the instance, then you remove it. Even if you destroy your instance, you still have the EBS volume available for you. So that is the purpose of this. In the previous screen, when you say protect against accidental termination, this is for your EC2 instance itself. So when you go and say terminate your EC2 instance, if you don't have this flag, protect against accidental termination, it will immediately terminate without even asking you anything. When you put this flag, when you say terminate, then it's going to come back and ask you, are you sure you want to terminate? So you have one more additional step telling you that, hey, you are trying to terminate the EC2 instance. That is what you are intent to do. That is the main purpose of this particular flag. Understood?
Yeah. Yes. Hey, Raj, it's Al. Yeah, that when you do that and then you try to delete the instance, it just asks you for confirmation.
Yes,
when you
that is correct.
So it's kind of like your protection. But
yes.
Those 5 different volume types, not the root volume, but the 5 different additional volumes, I agree. When I took the test 6 months ago, there was only 3 or 4. So they must have added another one. But they do have scenario questions regarding which one's best. So if hopefully you can review that pretty heavy because they do ask you on that.
Okay, sure. Because we haven't even reached that stage.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you.
Sure. So now, so far what we saw, honestly, we are only saw from the aspect of, let me go back here, aspect of root volume. We did not see what is really an EBS volume is. So we are talking about if you are using a EBS as a root volume or instance store as a root volume, how things works. That's what we saw so far.
Thanks for your time and hope you enjoy this video. AWS Pro.academy provides affordable online live classes conducted by AWS certified professionals. Our exam preparation class is designed to ensure that you pass the AWS certification exam on the first try. If you don't pass at your first attempt, we will refund your training fee. Please check out AWS Pro.academy for more information. Also, if you like to receive sample exam questions and exam tips, please sign up our newsletter at signup.awspro.academy. Don't forget to check out other sections of AWS Pro.academy website where you can also find free resources like study guides, video courses, and sample exam simulator. Thanks for your time. Good luck with your AWS certification exam preparation.